His Royal Highness Prince Mustafa Zaha, Director General, Environment Protection Agency of Afghanistan. Sir, you have the floor.
In the name of God, the merciful and the compassionate. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Your Royal Highness, Honorable Heads of States, Honorable Prime Ministers, Mr. Secretary General, Madam President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to express my heartfelt thanks and deep gratitude to the government and to the noble and proud people of the Kingdom of Denmark for hosting this august climate change conference, COP15 and CMP5. Our appreciation is also extended to the United Nations Climate Change Conference Secretariat for their substantive contribution. It gives me great pleasure to extend the warm wishes of the President and the people of Afghanistan to the participants of this historic conference. 3 decades of conflict and violence inflicted a heavy toll on Afghanistan's ability to pursue its potential for economic development and progress. Furthermore, our well-being and security have increasingly come under threat due to rising global temperatures. Changes to snow and rainfall patterns have led to severe problems of desertification, drought, and flooding. Warming temperatures on the Pamir and Hindu Kush ranges are melting away our glaciers and with disastrous impact on farming and water availability. Afghanistan has lost well over 72% of its once dense forests and over 80% of its green cover during the past 3 decades. Some of our unique medicinal plants have been lost forever. Our indigenous fauna and flora are under serious threat of extinction. This catalogue of adverse consequences of global warming is not unique to Afghanistan. All countries, both rich and poor, are experiencing them in various ways. Global warming is impacting our planet much faster than efforts to address it. Unless we collectively commit to long-term strategies that would combat the rise in global temperatures, the consequences for our planet could be catastrophic. It is my sincere hope that the participants of the Copenhagen Conference will demonstrate the strength of will to move the international climate change negotiations towards greater commitments to reduce carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gas emissions that contribute to global warming, to combat global deforestation, and to provide developing countries with financial support and access to technology that would enable them to protect themselves against the adverse impact of global warming. Today, the peoples of the world are looking to the nations represented at the Copenhagen Conference to rise above national economic interests and commit to actions for the common good of our planet. I am confident that our deliberations will result in an agreement to set the world on a path closer to solving global warming and to ensuring the well-being of future generations. Therefore, the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan calls upon the international community to kindly adopt the following points. Afghanistan acknowledges that a range of funding sources are available to address climate change threats for developing countries. However, a significant funding deficit still remains, estimated to be about 80% deficit of the actual needs. This funding gap is expected to grow, particularly as regards to adaptation and technology transfer areas. If ad hoc funding policies and mechanisms are not urgently implemented. In Afghanistan, adaptation costs of climate change are estimated to be approximately $1.5 billion per year. This conservative estimate is likely to increase as better climate change estimation and studies are developed. Afghanistan will not be able to meet this financial demand without flexible and accessible international funding support. As indicated by recent reports, failure to achieve changes in investment and financial flows for climate change adaptation and mitigation programs will lead to unsustainable development and ineffective paths for the next 20 to 30 years. This undesirable scenario will lead to less effective and limited programs. New financing policies for climate change are needed both in developed countries and developing countries. With appropriate policies and incentives, a substantial part of the additional investment and financial flows needed could be covered by the currently available sources. Failing to address climate change threats for least developed countries, such as Afghanistan, will result in dramatic environmental, security, economic, and social consequences, including significant humanitarian crises. Peace and stability in Afghanistan are also directly linked to successfully meeting climate change challenges. Afghanistan is facing exceptional technical and financial tasks to address these challenges. Afghanistan has begun its climate change adaptation and mitigation strategy. However, Afghanistan requires significant and committed international support for technology transfer and financing mechanisms to successfully meet the climate change threats that it faces. The Islamic Republic of Afghanistan welcomes the commitment by all the parties for the successful outcome of this conference. However, the Afghan government insists on the parties to find practical and urgent solutions for the developing countries that are systematically facing the unbalanced and dramatic effects of climate change on the welfare of their own people. In relation to climate change adaptation, the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan calls on parties to establish a friendlier climate change adaptation network of best practices for developing countries in the Asian continent. Calls on parties to ensure that startup funding for adaptation actions in developing countries be made available at the Copenhagen conference to address the most urgent adaptation needs, especially for the least developed countries. Startup funding of some $5 billion will be hugely beneficial for this process. Urges parties to increase and sustain financial and technical assistance to implement climate change adaptation projects in developing countries, especially least developed countries. Urges parties to financially and technically support the establishment of long-term, that is to say, 10 to 20 years, climate change adaptation programs in developing countries rather than supporting shorter initiatives. In relation to mitigation for climate change, the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan calls on parties to urgently plan and promptly implement policies and measures for mitigation with special attention to land use change, forestry, agriculture, livestock, and from the energy, transportation, and urban and industrial sectors of their economies.